Welcome back to the Homestead Skill of the Month Club. I'm happy to see you here. This is one of my Thursday talks. We're in the month of March, which our focus is garden, soil, and seeds. And this is the second week. Last week I talked about seeds and we focused on the skill of sprouting. This week I'm going to talk very generally about gardening and particularly some strategies for people who feel like they don't know how to garden or feel overwhelmed at the prospects of beginning with gardening. And then I am also going to do something a little bit practical, as I always try to do. For people who are starting seeds indoors, we're going to go over 5 things to think about before you start your seeds. It seems to me that when we come into conversations about gardening, there's very often a quick split that happens. Between one side of the room, there are very, very confident gardeners who are conversant in the language of plants and plant nutrients and seasons and schedules and techniques. And they sort of end up in this little club over here. And then there are a number of people who simply pretend we aren't interested in gardening at all. And we can't possibly hang with these folks over here who are so conversant and have so much knowledge. So we kind of find ourselves silent or even intimidated by the great comparison between someone who has a lot of experience in gardening and someone who has very little. Today, I'm going to try to speak into that divide, that center point. How do you get from being somebody who doesn't know about gardening to somebody who does? And part of the reason that I'm speaking in this particular place is because it's the place where I am. For whatever reason, for whatever crazy reason, I decided when I was a teenager to reject my mother's knowledge of self-sufficiency and preparedness. I decided to not grow food. I decided to not take responsibility over this aspect of my life. I turned my back on it, and I allowed myself to miss out on possibly a decade of information, of offered information from my mother, which would have been so useful to me now. So certainly there are days when I grieve that, but there also are days when I can share a story of success, of saying that even though I was one of a majority of people who have let these skills go, or perhaps never been exposed to them, who don't have this knowledge of different plants and different seasons and different techniques, yet I have had the experience of changing that storyline, changing it from the storyline being handed to me in which I am not responsible for my own food, I am not capable of being responsible for my own food, into a storyline in which I can. I can be in direct relationship with plants. I can use my senses to observe how they're doing. I can use my natural compassion and instincts to respond to how they're doing. I can nurture plants. And when I fail, when I have a plant that doesn't succeed, I can respond to that and gain information from it, which I can use next time. So I'm staking my claim right in the middle. I am not a complete failure at gardening, and yet I am not a master gardener either. And I'm hoping that I can shed some light on this pathway, the space between, for all of you, my friends, my neighbors, my people who are sharing this mission, who might also be in that same situation or might like to be. So I'll tell a story about when I first began gardening. When I was first taking on the challenge of gardening, I have the personality of someone who just loves to be an A+ student right away, right? So I like to have as much information as I possibly can, and I like to get it all right the first time. So I asked the husband of a friend, also a friend, but that I was more conversant with his wife, and we had them over for dinner. And I found out over the course of the dinner that his profession was taking care of plants at rather a high level. He worked for the Arboretum in Boston, which is a really renowned center for taking care of plants and plant life and species of plants. When I found out that that was his profession, I thought, oh, well, this is my expert. This is someone who I can ask for advice. So I said, I'm a beginning gardener. What is the thing that you want to tell me? What's the wisdom that you can offer me so that I can be a successful gardener? Well, he was silent for a bit. It turns out that sometimes, not every time, but sometimes excellent gardeners are also people who are taciturn or short on words. That's a personality characteristic that fits well with the gardening life. So he was silent for a bit. And then he said to me, well, when you have a six pack of tomatoes, when you have a flat of tomatoes, there's six tomatoes, and you only have room for 4, you have to throw away the other 2. What? This is the advice that you have for me? This is this expert gardener, and this is the advice that he has for me? Well, of course I pressed the point. And although I didn't fully understand it ever in that moment, now that I've been gardening for 7 years, I understand exactly what he was trying to communicate to me, and what a wise thing it was. It is a true thing about gardening that you lose plants. You have to be in relationship with these plants. You have to be able to observe them and respond to that, and be able to change the conditions that you're offering to these plants based on how they're doing. And yet also, you have to be comfortable with the idea of throwing a plant away or letting a plant die. And I think that this friend of mine was trying to give me literally the wisdom of 10 years, 20 years of gardening experience right away, so that I wouldn't fret so much over each little detail. Basically, what he was trying to tell me is, relax, it's gonna be okay. I've been trying to put my finger on what it is that's so intimidating about master gardeners when you're just starting out. And I think most of it is that they're not the same. It isn't like reading a recipe book and having a set of things that you're supposed to do. It's much more like watching artists, different wonderful artists. And you could try to perfect this person's technique, or you could try to perfect that person's technique, but they're all different. And you don't necessarily, as a beginner, have a way to track why is this person in watercolor and why is this person in oils. Obviously, that's just the metaphor that I'm trying to use to express this, but there's so much diversity in outcomes as well as strategies based on where people live and also based on their personalities. Well, one thing that I wanted to share in terms of my story is that I've learned what a boon that is. As much as it's a challenge at first to realize that there are so many different ways of doing things, it's also how it works that we as individuals can have a gardening process that works for us. I'm a little bit loath to show my most successful gardening because for me, given my particular personality characteristics, the most successful gardens that I have had are the messiest. I like it when things reseed. I like it when things are all mixed together and tangled. I like it when weeds are nurtured and given space to grow. I can't necessarily justify that. I can't sit here and say that that's the right way to garden, but I can say that this is the way that it's working for me. This is the way that my particular personality is being expressed through gardening, and it is a creative process, and it is something that has a certain element of personality and individuality too. And for that, I have a story about a peach tree. So first, before I can explain the story, I have to explain a concept that I learned from permaculture, which I found extremely helpful. Whenever you have a living system that requires your care, you can prioritize things that you want to pay more attention to, and you can locate those things that you want to pay more attention to closer to your living space. So I don't know if I was quite clear enough about that. What I mean is that you're locating things that require your attention intentionally in places where you're going to be. It's a little obvious maybe, but I found that something that I could understand and something that was helpful for me. In landing on 3 acres of bare land and trying to decide what to do first, where to put things, the idea that things that required my attention should be right next to where I live made a lot of sense and gave me a place to start. So what I did is I planted my first garden around the circle of my yurt. At that point, I was living in a round wall tent called a yurt, and there was a pathway from my door around the back of the yurt and down the steps to the bathroom. So I intentionally planted that entire walkway from my door to the bathroom with plants that I wanted to look at every day. And it's one of the best moves I've ever made because I did take care of those plants, and every single one of those plants thrived. Not necessarily on the way to the bathroom, but on the way back, I certainly would look at my sage, I would look at my oregano, I would look at my strawberries, I would look at my lettuce bed, I would look at my catnip, I would look at my raspberries and my black raspberries, and each one of those plants had a place in my mind because I was walking by it every day, several times a day. Well, at one point, I had a vision of a peach tree up against my yurt wall. Now, I'm not giving you an idea of how to plant peach trees. Please don't take this as you should plant peach trees this way, but I want to share my story. I have 3 veteran peach trees on my land. We're zone 5, we're right on the edge between zone 4 and zone 5, so it's a little tricky to plant peach trees here. We're a little cold for peach trees, but of course, who doesn't want peach trees? So I had planted 2 of them already, and I went back to my nursery that I usually go to, where I feel like I have conversational rapport with several of the people who work there. And I was going to get another peach tree, and I explained that I had this idea to plant it up against the wall of my yurt and train it so that it would spread across the wall of my yurt. Well, the kind person at the nursery wanted to advise me not to do that. Very kindly, he wanted to make sure I understood that peaches need full sunlight. If you want your peach tree to bear well, you need to give it as much sunlight as you can. So having it up against a wall is not the right choice. And as he was speaking to me, I was thinking, this is good advice. This is good advice. And also, I have a vision, and I need to follow my instincts. Now, it wasn't just instinct. There also are some advantages. And maybe I hadn't made it completely clear to the person at the nursery what exactly I meant to do. Because a yurt is round, and so the walls actually were falling away from the place where I wanted to plant the peach tree. It's right on the south edge, so there would be most sunlight. There would be the most sunlight that it could be anywhere around the edge of the yurt. And also, those canvas walls absorb heat, and so actually create a little bit of a microclimate, so that peach tree up against that wall was going to be warmer than it would be if it were out in a field having full sunlight. Well, I didn't argue about it, but I did say to myself, I think in this case, I just have to follow my own instincts and do it my way. And I did, and I'm happy to report that it is my happiest peach tree, that it is fruiting well, and my other 2 peach trees haven't even given us any fruit. And I think that's a satisfaction to say that I needed to have the ability to trust my gut, to say, I'm walking past this space each day. I know I'm going to be able to pay attention to this peach tree. I understand that this microclimate is going to be created that will keep it a little bit warmer. Maybe it doesn't have as much sunlight, but maybe a peach tree with a little less sunlight is better than a dead peach tree. So why am I sharing this story? Well, I just want to live in a world where we carry our own wisdom. I want to live in a world where we all have permission to carry our own wisdom. And I think it's just as important with gardening as it is with cooking, that we're able to embrace our own instincts, to follow our own instincts. And maybe the first step to that is to do what my wonderful, experienced gardener friend told me, and not stress the small stuff. Be aware that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to throw some plants away. And to let that information, when that happens, come into you, so that you are holding your own wisdom. And so that when you have a vision as you're walking by your garden of this plant here or this plant here, when you see in your mind's eye how the plants go together, you can trust that and you can try it. And if it doesn't work, or if it doesn't give you the effect that you wanted, then you can go ahead and make decisions about how to progress from there. I'm extremely passionate, as you all know, about taking back our responsibility for ourselves, our responsibility for self-care, and our capacity for self-care. I believe that it makes us stronger people, it makes us kinder people, it makes us more capable people. And so if you're someone who's on this side of the room among the gardeners and looking at these master gardeners over here and looking for a way to get from here to there, this is what I recommend. The wisdom of being able to throw away those 2 tomato plants that you don't have a place to plant, and the wisdom to be able to plant your peach tree where your heart tells you to plant your peach tree. I wish you the strength and capacity to follow your own heart and to recognize your own wisdom. That's the inspiration for the day. That's the story. Now, I always try to give you something informative as well. So I'm going to break for just a second, and then I'm going to go over 5 things to think about, 5 steps to go through before you plant seeds indoors. Onto something just a bit more practical. All of this capacity to store our own wisdom also requires the capacity to learn, to take in information from people who have it, and also from books and other resources. So we have had a challenge each week, which I kind of affectionately call the homework. Of course, there's no such thing as homework in a video series, but we've had a challenge each week. Last week I wasn't clear about what it was, but I was encouraging people to try sprouting something. We had talked about seeds, and then we had a couple of tutorials about how to sprout something without soil. And the idea of how to get a seed to go from its dormant state to its awake state, how to wake up a seed, it was a skill that we certainly could check off of our list of skills for homesteaders. This week, the challenge, should you choose to accept it or if it's appropriate for your climate zone, is to start a seed in soil. So many people will start seeds right out in the garden, in your raised beds, or in your dirt, or your double dug beds, or whatever kind of beds you have. But also some people will want to start seeds in containers indoors, especially to force the growing season longer. So what I'm offering today are 5 things to think about, a sequence to go through before you start your seeds. And this is particularly dedicated to Maria, who is one of our admins in the Facebook group, who was going back and forth with me about some technical things for the Facebook group and confessed or complained that she was confused about her seed starting. So I thought, well, I have a pretty clear idea of what things at least you need to think about. So here are 5 buckets to make sure you've filled in the information in before you start your seeds. Bucket number 1. Should you be starting plants from seed at all? Well, if you are a first-time gardener or you're early in your process and you want to purchase plants already started from a commercial grower, is that okay? I'm here to tell you that I think it is okay, because I believe in small changes, I believe in small good things, and if it's going to be possible for you to have a garden, if you use that system that's in place of commercial growers providing starts, I think that's fine. But maybe you are someone who wants to start your plants from seed. I think there are probably 3 really good reasons to plant your plants from seed. One is that the commercially grown plants are generally grown with a lot of chemicals. A second is that they're usually hybrids, and therefore you won't be able to save seed from that and expect that seed to breed true. The third, and perhaps the best reason of all, is that starting your plants from seed is cheaper. If you look at the comparison price between the seed packet and the started plant, it's a pretty significant difference. So if one of those 3 reasons really pops out at you, then continue on to the next step, which is, which plants should you be starting from seed? Basically, there are 2 reasons why you might want to start your plants inside. One is if you are forcing the plant into a lower climate zone than it can tolerate. So I have already given the example that I'm in zone 5, and tomatoes are really happiest in zone 10. So what do I have to do to extend that season to make it possible for a tomato to thrive and give me its produce that I want, even though I live in the wrong zone? Another reason that you might want to start seeds indoors is to have more control over the process. So sometimes even for things like lettuces, which would grow perfectly well in the ground and also are relatively cold weather tolerant, so you can plant them sooner, some people will want to just plant those indoors and see them come up and then arrange them in the garden, and that gives you more control over the process and more control over the arrangement in the garden, Because if you don't do that, then maybe some won't come up, or maybe you'll have a few seeds too close together, or maybe you won't have as good of results because you didn't give those plants their optimum best treatment for their first few weeks of life. So that was the second bucket. We've decided we're going to start things from seed. We've decided which things we're going to start from seed. Now we're going to the category of conditions. What are the conditions of this seed starting operation? We're going to talk about containers. We're going to talk about soil or the medium of growth, and we're going to talk about light and heat. So things to think about for containers. Many different kinds of containers will work, and we're going to have 2 tutorials about different methods this weekend. So you can watch out for that if you want to get those concepts or those differences from us. You also may just want to do your own research, ask your friends, and see what people use. It's useful though. At least this was a light bulb for me as I've gone through my gardening journey, to understand that containers should be clean. It's fine to reuse containers, but they should be clean, because the conditions that are good for growing your plants are also good for growing all sorts of things, and you don't want to be harboring disease that will then harm your tender brand new plants. The second thing to think about after containers is the soil medium. You can purchase a potting mix, you can make your own potting mix, or you can bring in soil from the garden. If you are making your own potting mix, that's generally 3 parts. 1 part peat moss or sphagnum, 1 part vermiculite, and 1 part compost. Of course, everyone has their own recipe, and some people use soil additives as well. But if you've heard that peat moss, vermiculite, compost trio, that's very common. And the purpose of that is to create a medium that's going to drain very well, so that air and moisture will move freely to create good conditions for that young plant. If you're bringing in soil from the garden, you're probably going to want to mix it with something like peat moss or vermiculite, or both, in order to create that porous medium that water and air can move through. And you also may want to sterilize your soil. You may want to actually spread it out on trays in the oven and keep it at 200 degrees for a half an hour. If you do that, go look for a tutorial. Don't just take it from that. Or ask advice from someone else. But the reason for that is to kill any microorganisms that might cause disease in those newborn plants. The same way that you clean your containers, you also would want to clean your garden soil. So having covered containers and soil, just a couple of words to where you're going to locate these starts and how you're going to light them and keep them warm. I don't have a grow light in my off-grid setup, but I wish I did. If you have the opportunity to have a grow light, I would look into it. They're not terribly expensive, and I do see people getting excellent results with them. Of course, you can also start things in a windowsill, but your plants they need light. They need sunlight to thrive, and they need that sunlight in a protected, warm environment. So whether that's a greenhouse or a windowsill or under a grow light, that's a thing that you need to research and make a decision about before you start your plants. It's also worth noting that seeds want to be warm to germinate, between 65 and 85 degrees. Some people put them on top of the refrigerator. Tanji's going to talk about that tomorrow in order to keep the bottoms warm. There also are things called seed mats, which you can run electricity through, and then you grow your seedlings on top of the mats, and they will keep those, they're warm, especially for the period of germination. And you can even lay your tray over the seed mat to germinate, and then once it's germinated, you can move it to another location and start the next. And that's something that's probably worth looking into if you're going to be starting a lot of seeds and you want to have great success. So there's my nod towards practicality. I hope that some of those thoughts get things moving for you or help you to feel like you're organized. The challenge, should you choose to accept it, is this weekend to start some seeds in the soil. And of course, let us know how it goes. You can go over to our Facebook group to brag your homework, or you can tell us about it in the comments here. I so appreciate this mission that we're on together to reskill ourselves and one another, to share knowledge and encouragement, and to be the most capable and well-skilled people we possibly can be. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time.